At 5:16 p.m. on the 23rd of November 1963, Doctor Who announced itself to the world with the first episode of An Unearthly Child being broadcast. Despite the initial low rating of just 4.4 million viewers, the show quickly picked up momentum to become one of the BBC's most popular programmes. 7 decades later, and Doctor Who is firmly an institution of British television and popular the world over. For its 60th anniversary, 3 episodes, The Star Beast, Wild Blue Yonder, and The Giggle, will be shown over the course of November, featuring the return of David Tennant as the Doctor, along with the likes of Catherine Tate and late Bernard Cribbins, as well as Neil Patrick Harris, bringing back the character of the Toymaker, and Ncuti Gatwa's upcoming debut as the 15th Doctor. Understandably, a lot to showcase in order to celebrate Doctor Who's 60th birthday. But how's the show celebrated previous milestones, if at all? Let's go back in time and look at Doctor Who's other anniversaries. Overall ratings for the debut story in Unearthly Child weren't initially impressive. The debut episode was broadcast in the shadow of the assassination of John F. Kennedy and was repeated prior to the broadcast of episode 2. However, the ratings of the story as a whole only grew at a small rate. The follow-up story, The Daleks, would increase the profile of the show and start its popularity, steering more into the realms of science fiction than its predecessor, with the alien world of Skaro, coupled with the unique appearance and design of the soon-to-be antagonists, sent the trajectory of the viewings jumping up by 3.5 million over the course of its 7 episodes. Doctor Who had finally arrived. Season 1 finished on the 12th of September 1964, but in less than 2 months, Season 2 would be on screen. The link between the increased popularity of the show and the introduction of the Daleks hadn't gone unnoticed from the production team, and felt a sequel was needed to feed the audience demand. As such, the second story of the season would be the Dalek invasion of Earth, which provided a narrative that did exactly what it said on the tin. A story full of iconic imagery of the Daleks in a futuristic barren London, which brought the fear of the Doctor's popular enemies literally to the audience's doorstep, something that the show still aims to provide today. It also features the very first companion departure, with the Doctor leaving his granddaughter Susan behind on Earth after realising her immaturity into a woman and the fact that she has fallen in love with freedom fighter David Campbell. In the end, the Dalek invasion of Earth proved a worthy sequel that is arguably equal to or better than the story's predecessor. Episode 1 of the Dalek invasion of Earth was broadcast on the 21st November 1964, 2 days before the show's first birthday. However, despite the return of the Daleks, the real-life setting, iconic imagery, and companion departures, I don't think the production team penciled this story to highlight Doctor Who's first birthday. Despite its quick success in popularity, Doctor Who was still finding its feet, and I feel the production team's desire to bring the Daleks back following their successful debut relates more to exploiting an aspect of the show that worked so well in the first season. Also, with the show still being relatively young and still finding its feet, there was no sentiment in celebrating Doctor Who's first birthday. Nevertheless, for the benefit of history, trivia, and statistics, it's a fitting coincidence that the show's most iconic villains show up for the first anniversary. Doctor Who's 5th anniversary occurred during Patrick Troughton's last season as the Second Doctor, a period that showcased the show's ability to change its direction not just in the character of the Doctor, but also the narrative content, while still maintaining its core values. 2 of the key narrative plot points in the Second Doctor era was the base under siege and Monster of the Week scenario, with the invasion falling into the latter. Equally, the invasion also provides a glimpse into the show's future, with the introduction of UNIT and a modern-day Earth setting. The title doesn't really hide what the overall plot is about, but the twist of the story is the revelation of the invaders being the Cybermen, which occurs during Episode 4. It is fitting that Episode 4 falls on the 23rd of November 1968, 5 years to the day since the show's debut, as well as being fitting that it's a Cyberman story who during the Second Doctor era had become the most used antagonist. However, like the Dalek invasion of Earth not directly acknowledging the show's first birthday, it's the same with the invasion, and to be honest, at this stage of the show's tenure, it isn't something you would imagine the BBC would feel necessary to acknowledge. Nevertheless, it is fitting once again that a key antagonist shows up for a birthday. Although it now seems a distant milestone, 10 years continually on screen for any TV show, never mind Doctor Who, is quite an achievement and should be rightly celebrated. Knowing your Doctor Who stories, you might naturally point to the 3 Doctors as to be the story that celebrates the show's 10th anniversary. However, it isn't. It does act as the opening story for Season 10, Its actual broadcast dates for the 4 episodes were the 30th December 1972 to the 20th of January 1973. Therefore, episode 1 falls a week after the show's 9th birthday. Doctor Who's 10th anniversary was on the 23rd of November 1973, and seems fitting by now that the show's longevity should be celebrated in terms of other media. The Radio Times released a special supplement featuring interviews, stories and photographs of some of the show's past companions. However, what was done on screen? The answer is nothing. Season 11 would debut on the 15th of December 1973 with the story The Time Warrior, a story that features the debut of Sarah Jane Smith and the Sontarans, as well as the revelation of the Doctor's home planet being called Gallifrey, and to me, it would have felt fitting to celebrate 10 years of Doctor Who, albeit on a small scale. However, it wasn't to be, and this was probably down to the BBC's scheduling setup for the Saturday evening viewing slot, where Doctor Who found itself. Coupled with the recording schedule the Doctor Who production team would have found themselves working within. Despite this, you feel it was a missed opportunity. So far, Doctor Who hasn't really acknowledged any of its milestones directly, albeit with some strong stories being broadcast in or around the key date. The show's 15th anniversary fell deep into the 4th Doctor era, with Tom Baker having a few years earlier taken the show to what is still regarded as its golden era under the stewardship of Philip Hinchcliffe as producer and Robert Holmes as script editor. By the time the 15th birthday arrived, that golden age had passed, although the show was still as ever popular, albeit the quality of the stories, now under producer Graham Williams and script editor Anthony Reid, had waned slightly. Season 16, also known as the Key to Time season, would be broadcast during the point when the show's 15th anniversary would arrive. A single arc storyline that had never been carried out in such a manner at that point, and in a way is a nice nod for the show's 15th anniversary, albeit Season 16 doesn't feature any reoccurring antagonists, and the 6 stories, when isolated, aren't the great stories of the show's history. The 23rd of November 1978 fell between the 3rd story, The Stones of Blood, and the 4th story, The Androids of Tara. Once again, nothing was acknowledged on screen. However, there was plans to include a scene with Romana presenting the Doctor with a birthday cake. However, this never made it past the writing stage, as producer Graham Williams viewed it as too self-congratulatory and out of sync with the mood of the show. There is, however, an outtake available as an extra on the Stones of Blood DVD, featuring a seemingly slightly intoxicated Mary Tam and Tom Baker celebrating with some champagne, and generally fooling around in what you can imagine was just done for laughs. Away from the TV screens, there was a private party held to celebrate the 15th anniversary, with key players from both sides of the camera attending. There are some pictures circling around the internet, and it is one of the few occasions that Patrick Troughton, John Pertwee and Tom Baker were all seen together. 20 years in, and you could argue that Doctor Who had finally celebrated its birthday accordingly, with a one-off special, The Five Doctors, a single 90-minute episode in which John Nathan Turner applied several methods to acknowledge the show's history and culture. Reaching out to former script editor Terence Dix meant the narrative was treated accordingly, involving a story when then all 5 incarnations of the Doctor found themselves taking out their own time streams, along with some of their companions, to battle against antagonists of old in the Forbidden Death Zone on Gallifrey in order to gain access to the Tomb of Rassilon, which in the end was set up by the Doctor's old teacher and mentor, Arusa, who sought immortality for retribution for what he had done over the recent history to stop Gallifrey falling into chaos. The narrative is pretty straightforward and unchallenging to the audience, but this allows time to fit in so many faces into the story, and in the end is designed to be a joy fest to the fans, which it does almost perfectly. Although the 20th anniversary celebration was successful and popular, the show wasn't at its peak. However, 5 years later, the classic era of Doctor Who had found itself at its lowest ebb in terms of viewing figures and popularity. Stripped of its Saturday night primetime slot and placed into an evening slot during the week up against Coronation Street on ITV at the same time, Doctor Who was a shadow of the show it once was. Despite this, producer John Nathan Turner still wanted to acknowledge and celebrate the show's 25th anniversary with season 25. The opening story was Remembrance of the Daleks, which was one of the strongest stories of the 1980s, and one of the better Dalek stories of the classic era. The Doctor is once again squaring off against the show's most popular antagonists, as well as Doctor Who coming back to its origins, with the setting being London in 1963, just after the events of episode 1 of An Unearthly Child, featuring Coal Hill High School and Foreman's Scrapyard on Totter's Lane, which was the original TARDIS location, all showing up once again. However, Remembrance of the Daleks was broadcast from the 5th to the 26th of October 1988, so it didn't actually land on Doctor Who's 25th birthday. Instead, the season's third story, Silver Nemesis, was chosen as the 25th anniversary story, with episode 1 broadcast on the 23rd of November 1988. Once again, the Cybermen step up to the mantle of antagonists as they seek possession of the Time Lord artifact, the Nemesis statue, whilst a group of neo-Nazi soldiers and a 17th century sorceress are also on the hunt. Whilst it is a fun story, it doesn't carry the same weight and impact as Remembrance of the Daleks, which you would have thought would have been the most fitting of the stories out of the two to celebrate the show's 25th anniversary. Alas, this would be the last opportunity the show would be able to celebrate an anniversary during the classic era, as 1 year after 26 continual years, Doctor Who was taken off screens. By 1993, Doctor Who had been on hiatus for 4 years, and despite various ideas and plans to bring it back, it felt less and less likely the show would return, even if it was just for the 30th anniversary. Away from the TV screens, though, Doctor Who was still popular amongst fans, with new stories showing up in the format of Virgin novels The New Adventures, which explore narratives at a more mature level. Additionally, the 90s saw peak popularity of the advent of VHS as a form of home entertainment, with the BBC having already been fully utilising this format of media, of releasing stories for home viewing for the past 10 years. 1993, though, saw a bumpy year of releases, in particular with 2 metal box sets, one featuring the 2 Dalek stories The Chase and Remembrance of the Daleks, whilst the other featured the whole Trial of Time Lord season displayed in a TARDIS-shaped metal tin. On screen, there was various repeats of classic stories shown on the BBC, but in November 1993, the BBC broadcast a new Doctor Who episode to coincide with the organisation's annual charity event, Children in Need. On the 26th of November, during the Children in Need event, episode 1 of Dimensions in Time was broadcast, with episode 2 shown the night after during the BBC Saturday night primetime show, Noel's House Party. Despite the viewing figures coming in over 13 million, it was negatively received, and arguably rightly so. The story involving a convoluted plot featuring the Rani trapping the Doctor and his companions in a time trap saw its screen time shared with the BBC's popular soap EastEnders, which had its sets and cast utilised for the story. Rather than being a celebration of the show, the story, albeit designed as a vehicle to push the BBC's charity, turned out to be a parody and pastiche of Doctor Who, and once again resulted in a hugely missed opportunity for the BBC, and is perhaps a reflection of how Doctor Who was then regarded. 2003, and Doctor Who had seemed to be long consigned to the archives of the BBC's history as a TV programme, despite its popularity in other media, which now included DVDs, the expansion of the novels, as well as web shows and the Big Finish audio dramas. To commemorate the 40th anniversary, there was once again a continual influx of DVD releases, repeats on television, celebratory documentaries, but more promisingly, a brand new story in an online format with Scream of the Schalke, shown in a 15-minute episode format from the 13th of November to the 18th of December 2003, featuring Richard E. Grant as the Doctor. At this time, it felt that this would be the future of how Doctor Who would continue, with Richard E. Grant seen as a natural successor to Paul McGann's 8th Doctor, who at the time had only made his only TV appearance in the 1996 TV movie, and carrying on in the Big Finish audios. Despite the positive response, few people know that this new direction of Doctor Who would end up being a cul-de-sac of the history of the show, as 18 months after its broadcast, Doctor Who would finally return to the TV screens in a permanent fixture on the BBC. 2013. Doctor Who had been back on screens for 8 years, and was as popular as ever, attracting a new generation of audiences, whilst reigniting the interest of the fans of the classic series. By now, Matt Smith was carrying the mantle of the role as the 11th Doctor, with writer and self-confessed Doctor Who fan Stephen Moffat in the role of showrunner, having succeeded the ever-popular Russell T Davies. With the 50th anniversary fast approaching, Moffat and the BBC had the prime opportunity to celebrate the show's popularity in a way that could exceed John Nathan Turner's contribution back in 1983 with The Five Doctors. 2 days prior to the show's anniversary, we got the biographical TV film An Adventure in Space and Time, which explored the birth of the show and importance of what William Hartnell, played by David Bradley, brought to the show and the importance he played in its longevity. On the 23rd of November, we would see the anniversary story The Day of the Doctor being broadcast simultaneously on TV and in cinemas. Hints have been provided into what was being included in the show, with the announcement of David Tennant returning as the 10th Doctor, the Zygons returning for the first time since 1975, as well as the revelation of John Hurt playing the War Doctor, an incarnation of the Time Lord that battled the Time War against the Daleks, and that the Doctor had kept hidden from his history. This was supplemented with a shock introduction of the conclusion of the previous story, The Name of the Doctor, and a mini-episode bridging the gap of the 8th Doctor regenerating into the War Doctor. As for the story of the Day of the Doctor itself, Stephen Moffat presented a simple narrative which explored 3 incarnations of the Doctor taking the opportunity to change the outcome of the destruction of Gallifrey at the conclusion of the Time War. To add to the excitement, there was a couple of plot twists intertwined with the narrative, firstly with the brief yet shock appearance of the upcoming appearance of the incoming 12th Doctor, played by Peter Capaldi. To top it off, the story's conclusion saw an emotional and warming return to the show for Tom Baker, the oldest surviving actor to play an incarnation of the Doctor at the time, appearing as the mysterious curator, who informs Matt Smith's incarnation of the Time Lord that perhaps his plan to save Gallifrey worked, and it's out there somewhere in the universe, setting up a narrative to take into his next incarnation. At that point, The Day of the Doctor is arguably the definitive on-screen celebration of Doctor Who, that arguably exceeds the 5 Doctors, as it equally balances and respects the rich history of the show, whilst equally including the new generation of fans, whilst hinting at the direction of the show's future. So, there you have the various ways Doctor Who and the BBC have celebrated its various anniversary milestones. But what do you think? Do you have a favourite? Could these anniversaries have been respected and acknowledged better? Or were they adequate with the show's status at those particular times? Let me know in the comments below. But for now, it's the end that the moment has been prepared for.